In today's video, I'm going to share my 3 favorite ways to introduce a sense of atmosphere when I'm shooting in the studio. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here, and I shoot in the studio all the time. But sometimes it can start to feel a little bit sterile, especially if I'm just shooting against plain, seamless backgrounds. And so one of the things I could do is I could go ahead and build a set, or I could take my shoots on location. But sometimes I just want to add a little bit of atmosphere, a little bit of environment, a little bit of depth to my studio shoots. And that's what I want to show you today. In fact, I'm going to be sharing my 3 favorite ways that I introduce a little bit of atmosphere to the studio, but I do so with simple tools. And so those 3 tools are: number 1, having lens flare in my shots. Sometimes actually having the lights in the composition itself. Number 2 is by introducing filters onto my lens. In particular, I'm going to be using the Black Pro Mist. And then finally, I literally add a sense of atmosphere to the scene by introducing Haze, either in the form of Haze in a can or a Haze machine. And so those are the 3 tools I'm going to be demonstrating for you today. To demonstrate these techniques, I'm going to be putting together a fashion editorial shoot. And the idea is that I want my subject to look almost like she's on a stage performing. And so I'm going to put all 3 of those techniques together. And so where we're going to begin is with the first technique to add atmosphere to your shots, which is lens flare. Now you create lens flare by having strobes or a light source pointed directly into your camera. And you can see that's what we have going on with the set here. Now I am using 4 strobes behind the subject, and each one has a modifier called a grid. Now a grid concentrates light, and this is how I'm going to give more directional pockets of light behind the subject. These are a mixture of 10 and 20 degree grids. In addition to having these 4 lights, each one also has a CTB, a color temperature blue gel. So this is going to cool them down. I was inspired by looking at the subject's dress, and I saw a lot of different cool tones. There's a lot of blues and there's some magentas, and so my idea was to take the color palette and make it very cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn off the main light. We'll introduce that in a moment. And I want to break down and show you what it looks like with those 4 strobes. Of course, you don't need to use 4. You could use 2 or even 1 in order to demonstrate this technique. All right, so let's turn off that strobe. You can see a few things going on in this image. First of all, immediately, because I have the strobes in the scene, it already looks like she's on a stage. But you'll also notice that those strobes are doing a few more things for me. First of all, they're giving beautiful rim lights all around the subject, because yes, they're pointed at the camera, but they're also hitting my subject, creating beautiful separation. The next thing it's doing is it's introducing a little bit of flare. It's not overwhelming the image, but it is giving a sense of depth. So that introduces us to that first element of environment in the scene, having the actual strobes visible as well as lens flare. Now, before we move on to the next technique, I want to introduce the other strobes in my shot. So first of all, our main light over here is a white beauty dish with a grid. This is going to be used to illuminate my subject. This is a beautiful quality of light, which is going to be flattering to her skin, but the grid is going to concentrate the light. So a majority of it is illuminating her face and her torso. So let's take a look when we add our main light. So you can see how that's creating a really beautiful quality of light on her face. Now there's one more thing I want to introduce into the scene, which is another gel. Now I told you that my color theory is I wanted everything to be really, really cool, perhaps an analogous color scheme, meaning colors next to each other on the color wheel. And so I already have those blue gels in the background, the CTBs, so I actually want to introduce a gel in the front to fill in the shadows, on the shadow side of her face. And so I'm going to add a medium umbrella with diffusion with a cyan gel. This is my favorite tool for adding a kiss of color to the shadows. Now, if you'd like to learn more about gels, be sure to check out my class, The Magic of Gels, where I explain these concepts more in depth, how you can achieve saturated colors, how you can control exactly where the color of gels will appear in your photographs. All right, so let's see what adding that light changes in the shot. You can see that now there's a beautiful kiss of cyan blue in the shadow side of her face, which I think really helps unite the color theory. Now, so far, all I've done is talk about that first sense of adding atmosphere by putting lights and lens flare into my scene. But now let's move on to the second tool. The second tool I discussed is adding filters. Now there are so many different filters to choose from, but one of my favorites is something called a black pro mist. What a black pro mist does is it takes highlights in the scene and it makes them glow. One of the terms you might hear is bloom. And it's very, very common in cinematic techniques. You'll see it used in movies or more cinematic portraits. So the filter that I'm going to be using today is a Tiffin 1/8 Black Pro Mist. Now the 1/8 is the amount or the strength of the Black Pro Mist. They come in many different strengths, an eighth, a half, a quarter, a full stop, and I actually use a full stop very often. However, in this case, because I'm shooting directly into the light sources, having a full stop is going to glow too much. I only need just a little bit. Now what's very nice is if there's any highlights on my subject or reflections in the scene, it'll make them glow a little bit as well. It gives a sense of atmosphere, depth, and a little bit more of a cinematic technique. All right, so let's add that 1/8 Black Pro Mist. All right, so you can see how much of a huge difference even that 1/8 stop of a Black Pro Mist makes. It took all of those highlights in the background and it made them appear brighter and have more of a glow around them. And so it's definitely more of a sense of atmosphere. Now, one of the other things that you'll notice is that it is flattening the image a little bit. It decreases some of the contrast. What we're going to do is address that in post, but I will do so after we add our final element. And so that final element is introducing haze. Now haze is a bit different from a fog machine. Now fog machine, what you'll see are big plumes of smoke. You actually see the smoke in the shot. But with haze, you only really see it if it's hit by light, especially when it's backlit. And so it creates more of a sense of atmosphere than being an element or a subject matter in the frame. The light becomes the subject, not the fog. And so there's a few ways to introduce haze into your shots. One of the ways is to use something called a haze machine. Now haze machine, it's great because it can fill a room. And so you can create really dramatic shafts of light. But of course, there's going to be more expense and maybe you don't have quite as much control. So another easier and much more portable solution is something called haze or atmosphere in a can. And that's what we're going to be using for these shots. And so it is just like it sounds. It's a can filled with haze that you can spray. And so if I just want a little beam of light coming from the top left-hand side of the frame, I can do so by introducing this spray. Stephen, will you give us a little demonstration of that? So now you can see what the haze adds to the scene. It adds a little bit more physical atmosphere to the shot. And the more it's backlit, the more that you will notice it. Now, of course, one of the downsides of the haze in a can is you have to have a subject there constantly spraying that haze, whereas a haze machine will fill your space and doesn't require an assistant to handle that. So both of these tools, remember, I'll have a link in the description below. All right, so looking at this photograph, one of the things that you'll notice is that it is a little flat. It does lack contrast. And the reason is because the lens flare plus a Black Pro Mist plus haze, all of those things decrease contrast. And so I would recommend adding a little bit of clarity or contrast back in post. So let me do that quickly. All right, so what I'm going to do for this shot is I'm going to pop over, just add a little bit of contrast, which made a huge difference, and a little bit of clarity. So here's the before, here's after. I think it's a much more pleasing result, but it's done very, very simply in Capture One, in Lightroom, or whatever raw processor you choose. All right, so now we have our scene, the beautiful lighting, the beautiful styling, and of course, those three elements of atmosphere. Now to bring it all together is getting the shot. Maybe I go for something more mysterious. Maybe I go with something for movement. It all depends on what you're trying to achieve. So now let's bring it all together and get the shot. Okay, so can I have you face that light for me? Perfect, let's put one hand up soft to your face. For these images, I was shooting with the Canon R5 and the Canon RF 24-105 lens. And the reason I chose this combination is because I could get wider shots that would capture a little bit more of her movement. And then I could shoot at 105 and capture a little bit more close-up shots. She's great at emoting, and I really wanted to be able to capture that without having to constantly switch my lens. Now for these shots, you'll notice that I don't think it gives the appearance of it being necessarily shot in a studio. It doesn't feel sterile. It definitely feels like it has a lot of energy, a lot of environment to it. And so if you would like to try these techniques, remember, you can take a single technique or you can layer multiple for even more dramatic results. So if you'd like to see the gear used in the making of these images, be sure to check out the links in the description below, and of course, visit adorama.com. Now, if you found these techniques interesting, not only do I have courses on gels, but I also have courses on creative studio lighting. So you'll definitely want to visit learnwithlindsay.com to learn more about those. All right, guys, so I have a lot of videos that cover lighting and studio techniques and poses and much more, so you're going to want to be sure to like and subscribe. See you next time, guys.